Hey, what's up, Liron here. In this video, we're gonna paint together today's prompt for the Washtober challenge, which is zoom. And this is what I decided to paint. Our main focus is gonna be on how to merge this object with the environment, make it look like an integral part of the scene, and also get that focused look around the center of attention, which is the lens in the zoom. So hopefully that'll make sense. Let's take it to the table and get started. So first we'll start with the drawing. Now I didn't cut anything out of this process, plus I have not sped it up, okay? So we're going at it one step at a time. Now the paper is at a bit of an angle due to my hand holding it, so hopefully you'll still be able to get what I'm doing. The shape of the camera, which I chose for this prompt again, is a box. So what I'm first doing is creating that box. All of the little details, the leather or plastic parts and the metal parts and the screws and the knob and it all can be added in just a few moments, but first you want to build a strong base. So this is a box that moves away from us in space. I want to capture that, the fact that the top plane of the box where the lens sits is moving away from us, so the farther edge of it is a little smaller than the closer one. So what you get is the two lines, all the lines that move away from us taper to an invisible point in the far distance, okay? And if you follow that very gentle tapering and you try to include it in your work, you will be able to express this three-dimensional shape in an accurate manner. Next, we're moving on to the lens itself, and here is the easiest shape to simplify this is a tube. So I created this, or rather a cylinder. So I created a cylinder, added some cross contour lines to show me where all the details pass through, okay? And on top of that, I will base some details in just a few moments. Now I added this boxy, chromy looking metal piece on the right side. Now I'm going to add this knob on the right, which is probably for the menu control. All of the smaller details can now be added. Now, in the past, I would stop with a very simplified sketch, but here I do want to keep the details rather accurate if I can. So what I'm going to do is go over again everything and tighten it up and make it look as organized as I can, okay? With a pretty sharp pencil and a longer one, not a tiny one like you see me very often use. So here we go, starting to establish some of the thinner, smaller details. So the top part of the lens, how it spills out. I don't know what the official name for this kind of a shape is. And all of the smaller shapes of the parts that you can rotate and twist around. Now it's very important to work clean and pay close attention to the edges on the right and left. This is where we really get to show the shape of the cylinder. This is where you want to make sure your lines wrap around it. So imagine this, all of these movable parts wrapping around that cylinder we drew. In addition to that, notice what I put emphasis on, the light and shadow. I wanted to really show where the light goes, where the shadow goes. And I can tell by this zigzaggy shape I created where to paint each and every part, like the light, the mid values, the dark values, and all of that. And now, after we have a solid base, we can start adding the smaller details. So you have this small knob over there, the bolts and everything that fastens the different parts of the camera in place. All of these small details that are not as important, believe it or not, for the final impression, but they are important if you do want to focus on some areas more accurately. Now, I cut out some of the mixing. This I did cut out, but it was a very long process of getting enough paint, mainly, because what I plan on doing is, again, one of the motifs here is to make this camera look like an integral part of the painting. It cannot look like a cutout. It cannot look like something that was glued on top of this tabletop. So a big part of that is done in the first wash, and it comes down to merging different areas. So here is my plan for the first wash. I'm going to paint over everything that is not a very light highlight. Anything that's almost white, I'm going to skip, and the rest I'm going to connect pretty much everything together. okay? And for this, I need enough paint. And also notice the brush I'm working with. It's pretty huge. It's a Leonard size 6, the equivalent of 16 because it's a mop. The size is a little written differently. It doesn't have an awesome tip. It's like a good tip. It's okay. But for my needs here, it's good enough. The main key here, I wanted it to be large enough. Because I don't want to have any unevenness in the paint. So with a larger brush, this is a little easier. Of course, you have to learn how to control it. So here I go, connecting the shadowy side of the camera pretty much completely with the rest of the tabletop. I'll probably do the same connection for the part above it. I just don't remember exactly. But I'm just covering everything that is not a highlight, okay, and connecting it all together. Again, this is integral if you want the painting to feel like a one complete creation. Now notice how I didn't bog myself down with that inner ellipse inside the top of where the lens are. So I am skipping some details, knowing that I can add them later on with a dry brush, with just adding, not a dry brush necessarily, but just paint straight out of the tube. I'm fine with that. But if I can get it the right way using negative painting, I will. Okay, now the light comes obviously from the left, so on the right side you'll get shadows, you'll get the shadows on the form itself, and you'll get the cast shadow off the table as well. The side of this left side of the camera is also darker, if you'll notice carefully, so I went over that, and I'm going over all of this area that I told you about earlier. This is actually really important. It's going to make it feel all like one thing together. Now, you have to understand, even if you paint individual parts together very carefully, you still cannot recreate this evenness that I'm creating now. Why? Because you'll always have these edges of the washes that will, maybe a small thin border will be created there, or maybe you won't be super duper accurate and there will be a small white gap. And this is a problem I see with many beginners, this white gap. If you can merge things, at least in the first wash, at least establish some kind of a base value that includes and encapsulates everything, you'll do well and it will feel unified, okay? And you won't have these weird, I do have some, white outlines on the right side of the camera, but that's fine. That's fine because it's just there. It's not all over and around the camera. So it does feel like an inherent part of the piece so far. Now notice how I'm already starting to establish the cast shadow because I want that to be fairly well blended. And also, I'm going to paint around this lighter part, you see, and around the knob, if I can. Okay, so I'm establishing the shadow. Now here, the previous layer started to dry at the top area. That's fine. It's actually really cool if one small part of the shadow is a little more solid. I'm fine with that. But for the most of it, I do want it to be an integral, blended part of this first wash. Same goes for all of these small shadows I'm putting in right now. I want some of the shadows to be a little looser and blended, because if all my shadows are made up of small different brush marks that are drier, you won't get that togetherness again. Now, next stage is increasing the contrast in some of the areas. So now I have a first wash that's fairly merged together. I let it dry completely, and now I'm darkening whatever is necessary. So if you'll notice, the contrast between the background and the camera's lens is stronger. And it's a very important part because this is going to be the focal point of the painting. So I'm going over it again with a pretty wet and flowy wash to make sure that I get that right contrast. There's going to be a lot of connections in this layer, but not like the previous one. Look at this now, this area I'm painting now. This contrast between the lens that's at the foreground and the darker background, it's really important, okay? This is pretty much like 80% of why I'm doing this additional wash. Now, I could have gotten it on the first go, maybe, but it's a bit challenging because think about, I'll have to make a differentiation between the background and the lens. So the wet in wet has to be very controlled. Plus, it's the focal point, so I actually want a hard edge there. Okay, I want that hard edge. Now, I'm using this opportunity to fix some of the inaccurate edges. And notice how I'm varying this wash now. Part of it is darker, again, to increase the contrast with the camera. The lower section of it is actually going to be lighter. Why? Because I want that very light cast shadow of the camera to show. If I go too dark, I'm going to make this shadow disappear, and I don't want that. I'm also using this opportunity to carefully paint around this knob on the side. Here we go. You see that beautiful round shape. and you can still see through the shadow from the previous layer, and that's key here. Okay, this part, the lower section, has to be light enough. Now, to be honest, when I did it, I did not know exactly whether I'm going to put in another cast shadow on top of it, or whether some of these things you really have to feel through. You have to put the wash down, look at what it looks like. If it looks too fragmented, maybe you'll go at it again. Maybe you'll add another glaze. But a lot of it comes down to putting something, learning from any possible mistakes, and then improving for the next time. So don't worry about being perfect here. Okay, now let's see what I'm doing, because I don't even remember. So I'm going to probably establish that closer side of the camera as a darker section. Probably, but I'm also using this opportunity to make sure that the shadow, the cast shadow, pops enough. And look at what I'm doing here. I'm connecting that dark area under the knob with that shadow. Okay, again, making those connections. Areas you want to blend together, make sure you connect them while they're still wet. This is something you'll learn with time. First, you have to master the technique to some extent. Not master, become competent at it. So knowing how much paint to use, what the paint is going to do, how it's going to react. And to get that knowledge, all you have to do is one thing, and that is paint. Paint as much as you can. Paint more and more and more. By the way, this week is really going to be in a motif of this Washtober challenge. Everything dried, by the way, so there was a pause. I let it all dry, and now I'm moving into the finer details. I'll just give you a few words about this week. All of the videos are pretty much going to be around the Washtober challenge, my alternative to Inktober. Now, I just want to mention, some people commented on the Washtober video. I have nothing against doing Inktober. If you want to do Inktober, go ahead and do that, and I don't even want to include myself in the drama. I have no idea what goes on behind the scene between Jake Parker and Alfonso Dunn. I don't know, and I don't want to assume. It's two creators I appreciate. I did watch more Alfonso Dunn's videos, that's for sure. But in any case, yeah. So this entire week, Thursday's live is probably going to also be Washtober, and I'm going to show you some paintings from the challenge. It's going to be really fun, and we'll do something together. It's just a fun week, and I really am looking forward to this week's live. I'm going to do it at the same time, probably Thursday around 4, well, it's 4 my time. It's 9 a.m. Eastern time. We'll see. I'll keep you updated. Now, for this part of the painting process, you want to be really accurate. Here we have the privilege of painting smaller areas. We have more time. We have more control over what we're doing. Less of a technique of blending and more about putting the lines in the right place. Okay. Now I use this opportunity to mix the shadows on the lens with the shadowy part, the shadowy metal part there. It's a little darker if you notice in the reference. And I use this opportunity to get it to be as dark, okay? And I'm going to keep that beautiful white border around it that gives us a hint as to what material it is. People always ask, how do you convey materials, different materials in watercolor? A lot of it has to do with the value. So if I keep this beautiful highlight in between the two sections, it's going to speak volumes about the actual surface, that it's a chromatic surface, it's highly reflective. Now, I did lose some of that, but I will put it back with some opaque paint later on. But it is something I have in mind. One more thing I should have probably done here is darken that closer metal piece that has a gradation from dark to light. That's something I'll do later on. But this is really the time to focus on all of these smaller details. This is the time to do that. This is when you do want to work slowly. And I see a lot of people kind of make the opposite mistake. They work way too slowly on the initial wash. Everything dries on them. It doesn't go even. And then for the small details, they work really fast and end up messing up the shapes. Not because they don't have the skill or they're not talented or anything like that. It's just because they're in a hurry. So I find that for the first wash, I work a little faster. For the later washes, I slow down a bit, especially for paintings where I do want to achieve some kind of a level of accuracy here, okay? Now, again, not everything is the right value yet. You see, I'm starting to put things slowly. There's a clear dark section right over there, but then it kind of forces me to maybe consider darkening all of this leathery section. I believe that's leather. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm kind of going to blend that line, and I'm going to, if possible, go back and add some darker values to this. And again, I left almost all of the process intact. I didn't cut out any stages because I know a lot of people do want to watch these. By the way, I want to thank everyone who joined last week's live. it's really huge for me. We've had like 120 or 140 people consecutively all throughout the stream pretty much, and I really do appreciate it. It's amazing. I'm curious to know if you're more likely to watch a live video that's longer or one of these videos, because the tutorial videos do force you to kind of stay there and watch. While with the live, you can just zone out, listen to it in the background. So let me know your thoughts on that, live versus actual tutorial videos. Now look at the bolt I just put there on the left section, bottom left section. Look at the shape. I really just imitate the shape that I see in the reference photo as well. And by the way, always link to the reference photo in the description box, the original larger size one. And it really gives the feeling of there is a bolt in the middle of a part that's indented. It's these small details you want to be able to read accurately and portray accurately. Okay. Now look at all of these numerals, or the small letters on the thing so you know how much to rotate it and what it's gonna do. Probably how much zoom or focus it's gonna have. I don't even know if this camera has zoom, to be honest. I don't know much about cameras other than like using the very basic ones. For all I know, this camera may not even have a zoom. I would assume it does, but who knows? It may just be the focus. But in any case, here we go, starting to establish that darker shadow on the bottom left corner, and that forces me to darken some of this area as well, because come on, it's darker. I want it all to be connected, I want it all to be merged well together, but there is a shadow there. So what I'm going to do is continue it, connect it to the cast shadow, and then be very quick about blending it right into the paper, making sure it doesn't spread out too much, and keep it, again, an integral part of the painting. You see I'm using some of the water sprayer just to make sure to spread it out a little. I'm going to use a paper towel probably also to soften the edges here and there, or maybe not. I think I do it in one of my recent processes. I just don't remember if in this one. And yeah, just here's the part I said I'll do. I should have done earlier, connected with the previous one. It's just about, noticing all of these small plane changes, things that move in space. For example, this is a curved metal piece, probably, which is why it has this beautiful, change from dark to light that's very gradual. Or it could be the cast shadow that's reflected, not the cast shadow, the shadow on the camera that's reflected on it, So now moving on to the opaque paint section. All of my only goal here is really just to bring back some of the highlights that I've lost due to, worrying about the wash being even, which is far more important very often. So I'm putting in those shapes very gently, trying to still be careful and accurate. One of the things you'll run into trouble with maybe when using paint straight out of the tube is that it doesn't have flow. It does not flow as well, especially on textured paper. So what you want to do is make sure you pick up enough paint. By the way, get rid of that water blot. You want to pick up enough paint with the brush, and whenever it starts to not move that well, you just dip the brush again in the tube. I actually have a video on it, I believe. You want to dip it back and use it again. Just use enough, use enough so that you actually get some flow, but not too much that you can't control the thickness of the line. It's a very tight rope and tight balance to control. With time you'll get it. Plus it's not a must technique. You can also use a pen, like I'm using the Uniball. You can find all the tools and materials, by the way, in the description box. I'm using the Uniball, I forgot the brand's name, but a white gel pen. I believe it's Uniball actually. So that's a good solution as well. Find the tools that work for you. I believe that if you use acrylics or gouache, you'll get better flow out of the tube. So yeah, find whatever works for you in that regard. And don't hesitate to use the tools you want to use to get the result you want. Okay, I think that's a big part of it, to really feel good about it. Now, a very important part. We did make sure to have everything flow together, but to give this some feeling of solidness, I am using a few dry brush marks here and there. What they convey is rigidness. Okay, it's rigid. The tabletop, the surface is rigid. And you can feel the camera resting on it. And this is one important thing I wanted to get here. It really gives it some volume, and it contrasts really nicely with all of the more blended areas. So this one's pretty much done. I really hope you enjoy the process. I'm just cutting some of this signing and all of these parts. I'm cutting them a little faster. It's not time-lapse. I just cut out some of the parts. Washtober, day 6, I believe. I don't even remember. But yeah, day 6, Zoom. Okay, so I'm going to consolidate all of these into one sketchbook, and it's going to be really fun to look at it later on. Final result, get a close look at it, and now let's wrap it up. So this is it for this one. Once again, going to give you a closer look. I really hope you enjoyed this one, and a major part here is getting that connection. So many people complain that their buildings or cars or different elements of the painting look like something that doesn't belong in the scene, or they look like cutouts or stuff like that. Even people with painting people in a cityscape environment often poses this problem as well. And this is one good way of having that first wash merge together everything in it as much as you can. And look at how beautifully it directs the viewer's attention to the focal point, and this kind of fades into the distance. And again, the biggest thing I wanted to achieve here is to avoid making this sharp shadow here. No need of that, okay? Just this keeps the balance like perfect in my opinion. Then these things, the lines, dry brush lines, provide some stability, some sense of volume to the desk or whatever tabletop. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to check out, as always, my frustration-free watercolor course, link in the description box below. And if you have any questions, let me know down below. I'll be happy to address as many as I can here, or maybe in the next live video. And I will talk to you again real soon.